Easy Explain the Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, chapters 13 through 15. This is going to be the end. So let's look at chapter 13, Knowledge, Error, and Probable Opinion. So knowing complex facts, right? And this is spilling over from where we just wrapped up chapter 12, looking at what it means for something to be a factual belief, a true factual belief. So here Russell says that thus in regard to any complex fact, there are theoretically two ways in which it may be known. The first is by means of a judgment, in which its several parts are judged to be related as they are in fact related, and or two, by means of acquaintance with the complex fact itself, which may, in a large sense, be called perception, though is by no means confined to objects of the senses. So he's tying all of this back to his theory of knowledge, right? How do we know things? We know them through acquaintance or description, preferably definitely, preferably firsthand, through our senses, our sense data, our perceptions of the sense data, our memories, introspection, knowledge of ourself, right? It's kind of what this is getting at here. He's tying it all together as we're coming down the final pipe here. But then Russell moves into this really cool divide where we're going to talk about knowledge, we're going to talk about error, and we're going to talk about probable opinion as a third option here. And he's about to set out his definition of all these terms, which I think is really helpful here. So first, what is knowledge? What we firmly believe, if it is true, is called knowledge, provided it is either intuitive or inferred, logically or psychologically, from intuitive knowledge from which it follows logically. What we firmly believe, if it is not true, is called error, right? This would be false. And then what we firmly believe, if it is neither knowledge nor error, and also what we believe hesitatingly because it is or is derived from something which has not the highest degree of self-evidence, may be called probable opinion. So let's keep going with this one a little bit more. This is new for us here. Thus, the greater part of what would commonly pass as knowledge is more or less probable opinion. More of what we think we know is not quite knowledge for Russell. It's more likely going to be a probable opinion. So in regard to probable opinion, we can derive great assistance from coherence, which we rejected as the definition of truth, but we may use as a criterion of truth, right? If something coheres, if we see some kind of relational, complex concepts, if they're coherent with each other, it may not necessarily define them as true, but it could help us in determining if it's going to be a true belief or not. And to wrap up this passage, Russell says, a body of individually probable opinions, if they are mutually coherent, become more probable than any one of them would be individually. It is in this way that many scientific hypotheses acquire their probability. They fit into a coherent system of probable opinions and thus become more probable than they would be in isolation. So again, thinking ahead to Quine's web of belief idea, if something is probable and you can coherently link it to something else that is probable, those two things are going to be stronger together than they are individually and isolated. Think about starting to build a web of knowledge, a web of factual belief here. That's kind of what Russell's getting after. So penultimate chapter 14, the limits of philosophical knowledge. There's some good stuff in here, but I just want to highlight a nod to Hegel. Russell brings up Hegel's theory of knowledge. He says, hence, one acquaintance with a thing does not logically involve a knowledge of its relations. And two, a knowledge of some of its relations does not involve a knowledge of all of its relations, nor a knowledge of its nature, its essence. So, Russell is echoing this. He's pulling in what he can from Hegel here, just kind of painting the picture of what it might look like. As we wrap up with the big finale, chapter 15, the value of philosophy, and this is really how he ends the book. I recreate it here. It's a little grandiose, a little optimistic, but I do think it's well said. I do think it's pretty to think so. So here we go. To wrap things up here, Russell says, philosophy is to be studied not for the sake of any definite answers to its questions, since no definite answers can, as a rule, be known to be true, but rather for the sake of the questions themselves, because these questions enlarge our conception of what is possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance which closes the mind against speculation. But above all, because, through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind also is rendered great, and becomes capable of that union with the universe which constitutes its highest good. So if you haven't been inspired yet, hopefully this is inspiring. I do think it's a very good, powerful, short book that is a great introduction to philosophy and also allows Russell to tackle some of the more historic problems, but also present some of his own ideas in a very accessible way. So for now, hope this helps.